I never thought I'd sit in a lawyer's office clutching my dead husband's wedding ring while my own son called me a burden. The words still echoed in my ears as I stared at the mahogany desk between us. Just 10 minutes earlier, in the hallway outside this very office, my son had leaned close and whispered those poison words that cut deeper than any blade ever could. Mom, you're nothing but a burden now that Dad's gone. 47 years of marriage, 30 years of raising him with nothing but love, sacrifice, and devotion. And this is what I got in return. My hands trembled as I twisted the gold band between my fingers. The same ring I'd slipped onto my husband's finger all those decades ago, promising to love him in sickness and in health, till death do us part. Death had done its part 3 weeks ago, leaving me with a son who only saw me as nothing more than an inconvenience. The funeral had been beautiful. I'd planned every detail myself, from the flowers he loved to the hymns we sang in church every Sunday for 25 years. But even as I grieved, I could feel my son's impatience. The way he checked his phone during the service, the way he rushed through the receiving line afterward, the way he'd started talking about practical matters before we'd even left the cemetery. "We need to discuss your living situation," he'd said that very evening, not even giving me time to process the reality that the love of my life was gone forever. "The house is too big for you now, too much maintenance, too expensive." I'd nodded along, thinking he was concerned about my well-being, thinking he wanted to help me navigate this new, terrifying world without his father by my side. How naive I was. Over the next few days, his true intentions became crystal clear. He didn't want to help me, he wanted me out of the way. He'd already researched assisted living facilities, already calculated how much the house would sell for, already decided my future without consulting me about any of it. "You can't take care of yourself anymore," he'd insisted when I protested. "You're 73 years old. What if you fall? What if something happens?" But I knew what he really meant. What if I become more of an inconvenience than I already am? The lawyer cleared his throat, pulling me back to the present moment. He was an older gentleman with kind eyes, someone my husband had trusted for over 2 decades. The manila folder in front of him contained our life's work. Everything we'd built together, everything we'd saved and planned and dreamed about. "Before we begin," the lawyer said gently, "I want you both to know that your husband, that he spent considerable time updating his will in the months before he passed. He was very specific about his wishes." My son shifted in his chair beside me, and I could practically feel his anticipation radiating off him like heat. He probably assumed everything would be straightforward. House goes to him, savings split somehow, case closed. Then he could ship me off to some facility and get on with his life. "If you believe a mother's love is sacred, please leave a like." The lawyer began to read, his voice steady and professional. The first few paragraphs were standard legal language, but then he got to the meat of it. My husband's final words to us both. "To my beloved wife, who has been my partner in all things, my companion through every joy and sorrow, my greatest blessing." Tears welled up in my eyes. Even in death, he knew exactly what to say to comfort me. But then the lawyer continued reading, and I watched my son's face begin to change. The confident expectation slowly drained away, replaced by confusion, then shock, then something that looked like panic. "I leave the family home and all its contents to my wife, to remain her sanctuary and haven for as long as she lives. The house is to never be sold or transferred without her explicit written consent, even after her death." My son's mouth fell open slightly. "Furthermore, I establish a trust fund in the amount of $800,000 to be managed solely by my wife, ensuring her complete financial independence and security. She is to never want for anything, never be dependent on anyone, and never be made to feel like a burden to those who should cherish her most." The word burdened hit the room like a thunderclap. My husband had known. Somehow, he'd known exactly what would happen after he was gone. He'd seen something in our son that I'd been too loving, too trusting to recognize. My son's hands were visibly shaking now. But what about me? What about my inheritance?" The lawyer wasn't finished. "To my son, I leave my tools, my books, and my personal effects. But more importantly, I leave him with this message. A man's true wealth is not measured in dollars, but in the love and respect he shows to those who gave him life. Your mother is not a burden to be managed, but a treasure to be cherished. I pray that one day you will understand the difference." The silence that followed was deafening. I stared at the ring in my hands, understanding flooding through me. My husband had protected me in the only way he could. He'd seen the signs I'd missed or chosen to ignore. The impatience, the calculations, the way our son looked at me like I was already dead. My son's voice came out as barely a whisper. He planned this, he knew. Your father was a wise man, the lawyer said quietly, and he loved your mother very much. I finally looked up at my son, this man I'd carried for 9 months, nursed through countless fevers, cheered for at every baseball game, supported through college and his first job and his wedding and the birth of his own children. The man who had called me a burden not 20 minutes ago. His eyes were filled with tears now, but I didn't know if they were tears of remorse or just disappointment that his plans had crumbled to dust. Mom, He started, but I held up my hand. Don't, I said softly, not here, not now. Because the truth was, I didn't know if I could ever forgive him. Not just for the words he'd said, but for the coldness behind them. For seeing me as a problem to be solved instead of a person to be loved. My husband had given me more than financial security. He'd given me back my dignity, my independence, and my power to choose my own path forward. And for the first time since he died, I felt like I might actually be strong enough to walk it alone. I never thought I'd be sitting in this leather chair, my hands shaking as I twisted my wedding ring. But let me take you back to the beginning. I was 22 when I met him at the community center dance. He had these gentle hands, callous from honest work, and when he asked me to dance, I felt something shift in my chest. He wasn't wealthy or particularly handsome, but when he looked at me, I felt like I was the only woman in the world. We married 6 months later in a small ceremony. I wore my mother's dress, altered with my own hands because we couldn't afford a new one. He worked at the factory then, coming home each evening with grease under his fingernails and exhaustion in his eyes. But he'd still wrap those strong arms around me while I cooked dinner on our second-hand stove. When our son was born, I was teaching 3rd grade at the elementary school. I loved those children. Loved watching their faces light up when they finally understood a math problem or finished their first chapter book. But when I held my baby boy for the first time, feeling his tiny fingers curl around mine, I knew what I had to do. I want to stay home with him, I whispered to my husband that night in the hospital. He stroked my hair, his voice soft in the darkness. We'll make it work. Whatever you want to do, we'll make it work. So I gave up my career. Just like that, 30 years of my life I poured into that boy. Every morning at 5:30, I'd slip out of bed before the alarm could wake anyone. I'd make coffee in the dark kitchen, then start preparing lunches. Not just any lunches. I'd cut his sandwiches into fun shapes, include little notes with jokes or encouragement. I'd bake cookies from scratch because store-bought ones never tasted right. I remember the smell of those mornings. Coffee brewing, bread toasting, the faint scent of my husband's aftershave lingering in the hallway as he got ready for another double shift. My hands were always busy. Sewing patches on torn jeans, mending holes in socks, creating Halloween costumes that took weeks to perfect. Other mothers bought their children's costumes, but we couldn't afford that luxury. So I'd spend evenings hunched over my sewing machine, crafting elaborate pirate outfits or princess dresses, my fingers pricked from pins, my back aching from the bent position. Our garden was my pride. We couldn't afford much fresh produce, so I grew everything we ate. Tomatoes that I'd can for winter, green beans that I'd blanket in the freezer, herbs that I'd dry and hang from the kitchen rafters. My knees were permanently stained with soil, my fingernails never quite clean, but watching my family eat food I'd grown with my own hands. There was something sacred in that. When our son started playing baseball, I was at every game, sitting in those uncomfortable metal bleachers, cheering until my voice was hoarse. I'd pack elaborate snacks for the team, coordinate carpools, organize fundraisers. The other mothers worked full-time jobs and hired babysitters, but I was always there. High school brought new challenges. Late nights helping with homework I barely understood, driving him to practices that seemed to multiply every season. I'd sit in the car during his guitar lessons, grading papers I'd brought home from the occasional substitute teaching jobs I took when money got especially tight. My husband picked up extra shifts. Weekends, holidays, overtime whenever it was offered. His hands grew more weathered, his shoulders more stooped, but he never complained. We'd lie in bed some nights, calculating bills on scraps of paper, figuring out how to make everything stretch just a little further. He'll understand someday, my husband would whisper when our son would roll his eyes at our secondhand furniture or complain about not having the latest sneakers. When he has his own family, he'll understand what we sacrificed. I believed him. God help me, I believed him. We never took vacations, never ate at fancy restaurants. Never bought new clothes unless the old ones were beyond repair. Every penny went toward making sure our son had what he needed. Piano lessons, summer camps, the good sneakers for basketball, a car when he turned 16. I watched other women my age return to careers, climb corporate ladders, buy beautiful houses. Sometimes, in quiet moments, I'd wonder what my life might have looked like if I'd made different choices. But then our son would come home with a good grade or a trophy, and I'd remember why I'd chosen this path. College applications meant more sacrifices. I took on extra substitute teaching, worked at the grocery store on weekends, sold vegetables from our garden at the farmer's market. My husband took a third job delivering pizzas in the evenings. We were exhausted, running on coffee and determination, but we made sure our son could attend the university he wanted. The day we dropped him off at college, I cried for 3 hours in the car afterward. Not from sadness, from pride. This beautiful, intelligent young man was our legacy. All those years of sacrifice, all those small moments of love and care, they'd created something wonderful. But college changed him. Or maybe it just revealed who he'd always been underneath. He came home less and less. When he did visit, he'd criticize our old furniture, our small house, our simple meals. He'd bring friends sometimes, and I'd catch him looking embarrassed when they saw our modest lifestyle. After graduation, he got a good job in the city, married a lovely girl from a wealthy family. They bought a house that cost more than my husband made in 10 years, had children of their own, and so slowly I barely noticed at first. He began to pull away. Phone calls became shorter, visits became rarer. When my husband got sick, our son would send flowers instead of coming himself. Always too busy, always some excuse. Those last months, when my husband was fighting so hard to stay with me, our son visited maybe 3 times. Each visit felt strained, like he was checking off an obligation rather than spending time with his dying father. The funeral was the last time I felt like I had a family. After that, everything changed. And sitting here now, in this lawyer's office, my hands still shaking around this manila folder, I finally understand what my husband saw coming long before I did. He knew. Somehow, he knew our son would abandon me when I needed him most. And he made sure I'd be protected, even after he was gone. I never thought my own child would look me in the eye and call me a burden. But there I was, 3 weeks after burying my husband, standing in the living room where I'd raised that boy, listening to words that cut deeper than any knife ever could. It started so subtly after the funeral. My son began visiting more often, which should have comforted me. Instead, each visit felt like an inspection. He'd walk through the rooms with calculating eyes, picking up my husband's reading glasses from the nightstand, running his fingers along the dust on the mantel. "Mom, this place is way too big for you now," he said during his second visit, gesturing around our home like it was some kind of prison. "All these stairs, what if you fall?" I was still sleeping in my husband's pajamas then, still catching whiffs of his cologne on the pillows. The thought of leaving felt like abandoning him all over again. "I'm managing fine," I told him, clutching my coffee cup with both hands to stop them from shaking. He shook his head, that patronizing smile creeping across his face. "Are you though? When's the last time you balanced a checkbook?" Dad always handled the finances. The finances, that became his obsession. Every conversation somehow circled back to money. The utility bills, the property taxes, the cost of maintaining a house, this size for just one person. "You know what assisted living costs these days?" I asked him once, trying to inject some humor into the conversation. "I'd rather stay here and eat cat food." His response chilled me to the bone. "Well, that might not be your choice much longer." The comments grew sharper, more frequent. When I mentioned feeling lonely rattling around in the quiet house, he snapped. "Well, what do you expect me to do about it? I have my own family to worry about." When I asked if he might visit on Sundays like he used to when his father was alive, he sighed heavily. "Mom, I can't drop everything every time you're feeling sorry for yourself. Every time you're feeling sorry for yourself." As if grief was self-pity. As if missing the man I'd shared a bed with for 37 years was some kind of character flaw. I started walking on eggshells around my own son, measuring my words, swallowing my tears, pretending I was stronger than I felt just to avoid his irritation. When the washing machine broke down, I didn't call him. When I couldn't figure out how to work the new television remote, I sat in silence rather than ask for help. But the worst part was watching him inventory our belongings. He'd pick up my husband's watch, my grandmother's china, the family photos we'd collected over decades. His eyes would linger too long, and I'd catch him whispering to his wife in the kitchen. "This is worth something," I heard him say once, holding up the silver candlesticks we'd received as a wedding gift. The breaking point came on a Tuesday afternoon in November. I'd made his favorite cookies, the same recipe I'd been making since he was 7 years old, double chocolate chip with walnuts. I'd arranged them on the good plates, the ones with the tiny roses around the edges. He barely glanced at them. "Mom, we need to talk," he said, settling into his father's chair without invitation. "This situation isn't sustainable." Situation, like I was a problem to be solved rather than his mother who was grieving. "I've been looking at some places," he continued, pulling out a manila folder thick with brochures. "Nice facilities, clean, safe, you'd have people your own age to talk to." I stared at the glossy pamphlets he spread across my coffee table. Sunset Manor, Golden Years Community, Pleasant Valley Assisted Living. The names were designed to sound cheerful, but all I could see were waiting rooms for death. "I don't need a facility," I said quietly. "I need my home." "Your home?" His laugh was bitter. "Mom, you can barely manage the upkeep. The gutters need cleaning, the furnace is ancient, and don't get me started on what this place costs to heat. Your father and I managed just fine. Dad's gone." The words exploded out of him, sharp and cruel. "He's not coming back to fix the leaky faucet or shovel the driveway. It's just you now and frankly." He paused, and in that pause, I saw something in his eyes that made my blood run cold. Not love, not concern, something calculating and cold. "Frankly, you're just expensive." Expensive, like I was a car with too many miles or an appliance past its warranty. I felt something crack inside my chest, not my heart breaking, but something harder, something that had been holding me together since the funeral. "Expensive," I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. "Don't take it personally, Mom. It's just reality. Dad's gone and you're a burden now. The house, the bills, the constant worry about whether you're okay, it's too much for all of us." A burden? I looked at this man, this stranger wearing my son's face, and saw 30 years of my life flash before my eyes. Sleepless nights when he had fever, driving him to soccer practice in the rain, saving every penny for his college tuition while wearing shoes held together with tape, working double shifts at the diner to pay for his wedding. All those years, I thought I was investing in love, building a relationship, creating a bond that would last beyond my husband's death. But standing there in my living room, surrounded by the memories of a lifetime, I realized I'd been wrong. I wasn't his mother anymore. I was just expensive. The cookies sat untouched on the good plates, growing cold while my son continued talking about square footage and monthly costs and practical solutions. His voice became background noise as I stared at the family photo on the mantel, the three of us at his high school graduation, arms around each other, smiling like we'd never be anything but happy. That's when I knew. My husband had been right all along. Have you ever been betrayed by family? Tell me in the comments. I never thought I'd be sitting alone at 3 a.m, holding a photograph of my son's first day of kindergarten, wondering where everything went so wrong. The house felt like a tomb. Every creak of the floorboards echoed through rooms that had once been filled with laughter, with life, with purpose. I sat on the edge of the bed, my husband's side of the bed, clutching that old coffee mug he'd refused to let me replace for 15 years. The chip on the handle was sharp against my thumb, but I couldn't let go. "You're becoming a burden, Mom." Those words kept playing in my head like a broken record. My son, my baby. The little boy I'd rocked to sleep through countless nights of colic, whose scraped knees I'd kissed, whose dreams I'd nurtured. He'd looked me in the eye and called me a burden. I pulled out our old photo albums, the ones I'd spent hours organizing when the kids were small. Picture after picture of birthday parties I'd planned, school plays I'd sewn costumes for, little league games where I'd cheered from those uncomfortable metal bleachers until my voice was hoarse. There I was in every photo, always in the background, always serving, always giving. The wedding album fell open to our first dance. I traced my finger over my young face, so full of hope and dreams. I'd been 22, barely older than my son was when he graduated college. Back then, I thought love could conquer anything. I thought if you just loved hard enough, sacrificed enough, gave enough, it would all work out. I'd been so wrong. Tears fell onto the plastic sleeves protecting those memories. 47 years of marriage, 30 years of being a mother. And for what? To be told I was a burden by the child I'd given everything to. I set the album aside and walked to the kitchen, my bare feet cold against the linoleum. The refrigerator hummed its familiar tune, covered in old photos held up by magnets from family vacations. Beach trips where I'd packed every meal, applied every coat of sunscreen, worried about every scraped knee and sunburn. Christmas mornings where I'd stayed up until 2 a.m. wrapping presents, then woken at 5 to start the turkey. The good plates were still in the sink from yesterday's dinner. I'd made his favorite, pot roast with those little potatoes he used to love as a child. I thought maybe comfort food would help us both through the grief. Instead, he'd barely touched it before launching into his speech about assisted living facilities. "You can't take care of yourself anymore, Mom. You're 73 years old. What happens when you fall? When you forget to turn off the stove? I can't be responsible for that." Responsible, as if I'd been anyone's responsibility for the past 50 years, instead of being the one responsible for everyone else. I picked up the brochures he'd left scattered across the kitchen table. Sunset Manor, where every day is golden. Peaceful Pines Assisted Living, your home away from home. The photos showed smiling elderly people playing cards, participating in arts and crafts, being spoon-fed applesauce by cheerful young nurses. Was this what my life had come to? Trading my home, our home, for a 10 by 12 room and communal meals at 5 p.m.? I wandered into the living room, past the couch where my husband used to read his evening paper, past the recliner that still held the impression of his body. The silver candlesticks on the mantel caught the moonlight. Wedding gifts from my mother-in-law, who'd never thought I was good enough for her son. I'd polished them faithfully every month for 47 years. Everything in this house told a story. The slight burn mark on the coffee table from when my son had left his science project there. The height marks penciled on the doorframe tracking his growth. The family photos covering every surface. Birthday parties, graduations, holidays, vacations. All those moments when I thought I was building something lasting, something meaningful. I sank into my husband's chair, breathing in the faint scent of his aftershave that still clung to the fabric. "What do I do now?" I whispered to the empty room. "How did I get here?" The silence was deafening. For the first time in 50 years, no one needed me. No meals to plan, no clothes to wash, no schedules to coordinate. My husband was gone. My son wanted me tucked away somewhere I wouldn't be an inconvenience. I pulled out the small wooden box where I kept our most precious mementos. Love letters from our courtship, hospital bracelets from when our children were born, ticket stubs from our anniversary dinners. At the bottom, wrapped in tissue paper, was the corsage from our wedding day. Dried and fragile, but somehow still intact. Just like me, I thought bitterly. Dried up and fragile, but somehow still here. I thought about all the women's magazines I'd read over the years, articles about finding yourself and pursuing your dreams. They made it sound so simple, so possible. But what dreams do you pursue when you're 73 and your entire identity has been built around taking care of other people? Who was I without someone to love, someone to serve, someone to worry about? The clock in the hallway chimed 4 a.m. In a few hours, the sun would rise on another day of this new reality. Another day of being surplus to everyone's requirements. Another day of being, what was the word he'd used? A burden. I pressed the coffee mug to my chest and closed my eyes, trying to remember the last time someone had truly needed me. Really needed me, not just tolerated me or managed me or made decisions for me. It had been months, maybe years. The tears came harder then, silent sobs that shook my whole body. I cried for the woman in those wedding photos who thought love would be enough. I cried for the mother who'd believed that devotion would earn devotion in return. I cried for the widow who'd lost not just her husband, but her entire reason for being. Most of all, I cried because somewhere deep down, in the part of my heart I didn't want to acknowledge, I was starting to wonder if maybe, just maybe, my son was right. I never thought I'd sit in a lawyer's office 3 weeks after burying my husband, still hearing my son's voice echo in my head. "You're becoming a burden, Mom." The mahogany desk stretched between us like an ocean. My son sat beside me, tapping his phone against his knee, checking the time every few minutes. He'd made it clear this was an inconvenience, taking time off work for what he assumed would be a simple reading of his father's will. The lawyer, a distinguished man with silver hair and kind eyes, pulled out a thick manila envelope. My heart skipped when I saw my husband's handwriting across the front neat. Careful letters spelling out instructions I'd never seen before. "Your husband came to me 6 months ago," the lawyer said, his voice gentle but formal. He was very specific about how this should be handled. He wanted his words read aloud, exactly as he wrote them. My hands trembled in my lap. 6 months ago, that was right after my husband started taking those mysterious phone calls. The ones where he'd step out to the porch, speaking in hushed tones I couldn't quite catch. I'd assumed it was about his retirement plans, maybe insurance paperwork. I was so wrong. The lawyer broke the seal with ceremonial care, unfolding several pages of my husband's distinctive handwriting. My son stopped fidgeting, finally giving his full attention. To my beloved wife, the lawyer began, reading my husband's words aloud. If you're hearing this, I'm no longer there to protect you. But I hope I've found a way to do it anyway. Tears sprang to my eyes immediately. Even from beyond, my husband was still thinking of me. I've watched our son these past years, the lawyer continued, his voice carrying my husband's message across the room. I've seen how he speaks to you when he thinks I'm not listening. I've noticed how he rolls his eyes when you share your stories, how he checks his phone when you're talking about your day. I felt my son stiffen beside me, the tapping stopped. I know he sees your kindness as weakness, your devotion as neediness, your love as a burden. The words hit like physical blows. My husband had seen everything I'd tried so hard to ignore. But I also know something he doesn't understand yet, that everything good in his life came from your sacrifice. The lawyer paused, looking up at both of us before continuing. The house we lived in for 30 years, your mother saved every penny from her part-time job to help with that down payment while putting me through night school. She ate peanut butter sandwiches for lunch every day for 2 years so we could afford it. I'd forgotten I'd even told my husband about those lunches. It seemed so small, so insignificant at the time. The college education you received without a single student loan? Your mother took on extra alterations work every evening, hunched over that old sewing machine until midnight, so you wouldn't start life in debt like we did. My son's face had gone pale. I remembered those nights, my fingers cramped from detailed beadwork, my back aching from poor posture, but always thinking about his future. The wedding we threw for you and your wife, the one you said was the best day of your life. Your mother sold her grandmother's jewelry, the only valuable thing she owned, to pay for that reception you wanted at the fancy hotel. A small sound escaped my throat. I'd never told anyone about selling those pieces. They were all I had left of my grandmother, but seeing my son's joy that day had made it worthwhile. Every birthday party, every Christmas morning, every little league game where she sat on those metal bleachers in the rain, she was there because she chose to be. Not because she had to be, because she loved you more than her own comfort. The lawyer's voice grew stronger, more deliberate. So here's what's going to happen. The house, the investments, the life insurance, everything goes to your mother. She earned every penny of it through 37 years of putting our family first. My son shot upright in his chair. What? But I mean traditionally. Let me finish, the lawyer said firmly, returning to the letter. To my son, I leave this advice. Your mother isn't becoming a burden. She's always been your blessing. The difference is, now you get to choose whether you recognize that or not. The silence in the room was deafening. I could hear my own heartbeat, could feel my son's shock radiating beside me. If you choose to see her as a burden, the lawyer continued reading, then you've learned nothing from the woman who gave you everything. But if you choose to honor her the way she honored us, then maybe you'll understand what real love looks like. The lawyer folded the pages carefully. There's more about the specific distribution of assets, but that's the heart of his message. I sat there stunned, tears streaming down my face. My husband had seen everything, my sacrifices, my son's dismissive attitude, my growing doubt about my own worth. And somehow, from beyond, he'd found a way to remind both of us who I really was. My son cleared his throat, his voice barely above a whisper. Mom, I didn't know about any of those things. The jewelry, the late night sewing. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something I hadn't seen in years. Shame, recognition, maybe even the beginning of understanding. You weren't supposed to know, I said softly. That's what love does, it gives without keeping score. He was quiet for a long moment, staring down at his hands. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. I called you a burden. Yes, I said simply, you did. But you're not, you never were. He looked up at me, his eyes red-rimmed. You're everything good about our family, aren't you? You always were. Sitting in that lawyer's office, surrounded by the weight of legal documents and my husband's final wisdom, I felt something shift inside me. The crushing doubt that had followed me for weeks began to lift. Maybe I wasn't a burden after all. Maybe my worth wasn't determined by my age or my needs, but by the love I'd given and the lives I'd shaped. My husband, even in death, had reminded me who I was. I wonder where my voice is reaching. Tell me your city and country below. I never thought I'd be sitting in this leather chair, watching my son's world crumble through a manila folder and a dead man's words. The lawyer's office smelled like old books and fresh coffee. I'd been here before, of course, when we'd first drawn up the wills years ago. Back then, my husband and I sat side by side, my hand resting on his arm as we talked about taking care of our boy. Our only child, our everything. 3 weeks. That's how long my husband had been gone when my son called me a burden. I still remember every word of that conversation. I was standing in the kitchen, still wearing my black dress from another sympathy visit, when he walked in with those glossy brochures. Assisted living facilities. "Mom, we need to talk about your situation," he'd said, not even looking at me. "You can't manage this house alone. You're becoming, well, a burden on everyone." A burden after 37 years of marriage, after raising him, after sacrificing everything. I was a burden. Now the lawyer cleared his throat, adjusting his reading glasses. My son sat across from me, fidgeting with his phone, probably calculating how much the house was worth. He'd been doing that a lot lately, walking through rooms with that appraising look, like he was already planning the estate sale. "Before we begin with the formal reading," the lawyer said, "I want you both to know that your husband, your father, he updated this will quite recently, just 2 months before he passed." My son looked up from his phone. Updated it how? He included a letter, specifically requested that it be read aloud. The lawyer's eyes met mine. He wanted to make sure certain things were understood. I twisted my wedding ring around my finger. 47 years I'd worn it. Through all those nights when I worked part-time at the department store while my son slept, saving every penny for his college fund. Through 7 years of caring for my husband's mother when she got sick, changing her sheets and feeding her soup while my son was away at university. Through all those times, I said no to myself so I could say yes to my family. The lawyer opened the manila envelope and pulled out several documents. Let's begin with the letter. My heart hammered as he unfolded the pages. My husband's handwriting, I could see it from here. Those careful, deliberate strokes he'd always used when something mattered. "To my beloved wife," the lawyer read, "if you're hearing this, then I'm gone, and I pray you're not alone in that room. But knowing our son, you might be. So let me say what I should have said more often while I was alive." I felt tears building behind my eyes. "You gave up your dream of becoming a teacher so our son could chase his dreams. You worked nights at the store for 15 years, coming home exhausted, just so we could afford his baseball equipment and summer camps. You never complained when we couldn't take vacations, because we were putting every extra dollar toward his education." My son shifted uncomfortably in his chair. I could see him from the corner of my eye, finally looking up from that damn phone. "When my mother got dementia, you didn't hesitate. 7 years, darling. 7 years you cared for her like she was your own mother. Getting up 3 times a night, bathing her when she couldn't recognize your face, holding her hand through every doctor's appointment. Our son was building his career then, too busy to visit more than twice a year." The lawyer's voice was steady, but I could hear something in it. Respect, maybe, or sadness. "I watched you iron his shirts before every job interview, even after he moved out. I watched you cook his favorite meals whenever he deigned to visit. I watched you light up every time he called, even when those calls came months apart." My son's face had gone pale. His hands were clenched in his lap. "But I also watched him, sweetheart. I saw how he looked at you after Mom died, like you were already a problem to be solved. I heard him on the phone with his wife, talking about what to do about Mom, like you were a piece of furniture that no longer fit their daycare. Oh God, he'd heard those conversations too. You are not a burden, my love. You are the foundation our entire family was built on. You are the reason our son had every opportunity to become the man he is today. Whether he chooses to acknowledge that is up to him." The lawyer paused, looking between us. My son was staring at the floor now, his jaw working like he was trying to swallow something bitter. "Now for the formal will," the lawyer continued. "I, being of sound mind and body, do hereby bequeath the following. To my wife, I leave the house and all its contents, including my grandmother's jewelry, the silver candlesticks from our wedding, and all furniture. I leave her my entire savings account, my retirement fund, and my life insurance policy." My son's head snapped up. "What about?" "To my son, I leave my tools from the garage, my collection of fishing equipment, and this message. Your mother's love cannot be inherited. It must be earned through respect and gratitude. I pray that someday you'll understand the difference between caring for someone and considering them a burden." The silence in that room was deafening. Then my son broke. It started with his shoulders shaking. Then a sound escaped his throat, half sob, half gasp. His hands flew to his face as the tears came, real tears, the kind I hadn't seen since he was 12, and broke his arm, falling off his bike. "Mom," he whispered through his fingers. "Oh God, Mom, I'm so sorry." I watched him crumble, this man I'd raised, this person I'd loved more than my own life. Watched him realize that his father had seen everything, had known exactly what kind of son he'd become. The lawyer quietly gathered the papers, giving us space for this moment I'd never expected. "I didn't mean it," my son sobbed. "When I called you a burden, I was just scared. I didn't know how to, I thought I was doing the right thing. But I wasn't ready to comfort him yet. Not yet. For the first time in 30 years, I needed to sit with my own feelings first. My husband's words had given me something I'd almost forgotten I'd lost, my worth. "The house is yours, Mrs., the lawyer began. "It's mine," I said quietly, testing the words. After 47 years of marriage, 30 years of motherhood, and a lifetime of putting everyone else first, something is finally, truly mine. My son was still crying, but I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks: peace. I never thought I'd be grateful for silence, but here I am. 6 months after that day in the lawyer's office, and the quiet has become my friend. The house feels different now. Not empty, mine. I wake up each morning and make coffee in the kitchen, where I spent 30 years preparing meals for people who barely noticed. But now when I sit at the table, I actually taste the coffee. I read the newspaper cover to cover. I take my time. Yesterday I planted marigolds along the front walkway. Bright yellow ones that seemed to glow even in this autumn chill. The neighbor asked if I needed help, and I almost said yes out of habit. Then I caught myself. I wanted to plant them. I wanted to feel the soil under my fingernails, wanted to choose exactly where each flower would bloom. My son has been calling. Every few days, sometimes twice a day. His voice cracks when he speaks now, thick with something I've never heard from him before. Remorse, real remorse. "I'm sorry," he says. "I'm so sorry, I didn't mean it. You're not a burden, you were never a burden." I listen, I let him talk, but I don't rush to comfort him the way I always did before. Some lessons, I've learned, must be felt completely before they can be understood. Last week he showed up at the door with flowers. Store-bought roses still in the plastic wrapper. He stood on the porch like a stranger, which I suppose in some ways he had become. "Can we talk?" he asked. I invited him in, made tea the way I always did. But I didn't fuss over him. I didn't ask if he was eating enough or if his apartment was too cold. I just sat and waited. "I've been thinking about what Dad wrote in that letter," he said, staring into his cup. "About all the times you sacrificed for me. The sewing machine money you spent on my baseball equipment. The way you worked extra shifts so I could go on that school trip." I remembered that trip. He'd wanted to go to the science museum with his class so badly. I'd picked up weekend shifts at the diner for 2 months, my feet aching by Sunday night. When I handed him the permission slip with the check attached, he'd barely looked up from his video game. "I remember," I said quietly. "I don't know how I became so selfish," he continued. "When did I stop seeing you as a person and start seeing you as just there?" It was a fair question, one I'd been asking myself for months. The truth is, I had enabled it. Every time he dismissed me, I worked harder to prove my worth. Every time he took me for granted, I gave more. I taught him that my love was limitless and free, that he could withdraw from it endlessly without ever making a deposit. But I didn't say that to him. Some realizations have to come from within. I've been keeping busy these days. I joined a book club at the library. We're reading a novel about a woman who travels to Italy alone after her divorce. The other women in the group are fascinating. There's a retired teacher who's learning to paint watercolors, and a widow who started her own catering business at 70. We meet every Thursday, and afterwards we sometimes go for coffee. I've also started volunteering at the food bank. 3 mornings a week, I help sort donations and pack boxes for families. The work reminds me that being needed and being useful are 2 different things. Here, my help matters, but it's not taken for granted. People say thank you. They mean it. Last month, I did something I'd been thinking about for years. I signed up for a painting class at the community center. The instructor is a young woman with paint-stained fingers and an encouraging smile. She told us on the first day that there are no mistakes in art, only discoveries. My first painting was terrible. Muddy colors, uneven lines. But it was mine. I painted sunflowers, bold and bright and unapologetic. When I brought it home, I hung it in the kitchen where a family photo used to be. People ask if I'm lonely. Friends, neighbors, even my son. They seem to expect me to say yes, to admit that this new independence is just elaborate pretense. But here's what I've learned. There's a difference between being alone and being lonely. I was lonely for years in a house full of people who saw me as furniture. Now I'm alone, and I'm discovering who I am when nobody needs me to be anything but myself. I still wear my wedding ring, not out of obligation, but because it reminds me of the man who saw my worth even when I'd forgotten it myself. His final gift wasn't just the house or the bank accounts. It was the reminder that my value was never dependent on being needed. Sometimes I sit in his chair, my chair now, and read his letter again. The part where he wrote about watching me give pieces of myself away until I'd forgotten what was left. How he'd wanted to protect me from becoming invisible in my own life. He knew, somehow, he knew what would happen after he was gone, and he made sure I'd have the strength to remember who I was. My son is trying to rebuild our relationship. He brings groceries now, calls before he visits, asks about my painting class and my book club. It's progress, but it's careful progress. Trust, once broken, doesn't heal quickly. I'm learning to say no. When he suggests I might be overdoing it with my activities, I smile and change the subject. When he hints that the house is too big for me alone, I tell him I'm not ready to discuss that yet. Maybe I never will be. This is my home. These are my marigolds. This is my second chance at being myself. If this story touched you, subscribe to Silent Confessions for more. I am not a burden, I never was, and neither are you.